Hello, welcome to the MuseScore Café for today, Wednesday, April 3rd, 2019. And my name is Marc Sabatella. I'm the Director of Education for MuseScore. And for those just joining us for the first time, this is like a weekly series of chats that I do just to talk about whatever aspect of MuseScore I feel like talking about and showing off or demonstrating, getting feedback about. Today's topic that I have chosen to at least start talking about is the Google Summer of Code program and our participation in it this year. Anyone who's checking in live and wants to participate in the chat, especially if you're a potential student or if you've participated in the past, we'd love to, just talk about people's experiences. What I want to do is just talk a little bit about the program as a whole, maybe my experience with it, what it's meant for MuseScore, what kinds of things it's brought to us. So for users out there who aren't developers, to get a sense of what this does for MuseScore, what benefit MuseScore has seen from this program, and just to help people understand what's going on. So Google Summer of Code is an annual program that Google runs that they essentially sponsor college students to work on open source software. So there's a whole competitive process by which you submit applications. If you're a student, you choose what open source software you want to work on. Well, first the organizations have to be chosen, and MuseScore has been chosen to participate in this, I think like about 6 or 7 times. Once a list of organizations that have been chosen, maybe there's 100 or 200 of those, students can choose which organization they want to submit proposals to. They'll submit proposals, and then the organizations kind of choose between those proposals, and in the end, some number of students are selected to work on each of these organizations, work on software based on their proposals. So MuseScore, as I said, has participated like probably about half a dozen times. We'll look at the look at the page with some of the projects on it so you can see. And each time there's been maybe 2 to 4 students that we've had working on it on MuseScore. And a lot of really, really valuable features have come out of this. I'll give a kind of an overview of some of what's happened in the past, but then we'll talk about the process of what's going on this year. Let me just say a word about that. The deadline for submitting proposals, if you are a student who wants to participate in Summer of Code, the deadline for submitting your proposal it's coming right up. So that would be useful for information for me to know, would it not? If there's anyone here who knows that offhand, feel free to let me know in the chat. Yeah. Okay, you don't want to see me enter my password. Good. I don't have my keyboard recorder on right now, which is good for that. So the timeline here shows that the application period goes through April 9th, which is kind of what I thought. So next week is when the applications are due. Applications are due in a week, and then there's a whole process where we review them. We might get dozens. I don't know how many we'll get, but in the past we've gotten dozens of applications, and then we end up having to select which ones, because we'll only have 2 or 3 or 4 slots of students that Google will sponsor. So we select which ones will end up being selected and get to be sponsored by Google. When I say sponsored by Google, I mean Google actually pays you. The amount varies according to various things, your location and some other stuff. And then you are paired with a mentor, and I have mentored for Summer of Code 3 or 4 times. And and the mentor can help you, guide you in your contributions to MuseScore. So I do have up the page somewhere. I've been working on bug fixes of my own here, so give me a moment to find where I put this where did I put it? Ah, there it is. Here we go. That's not even the page I wanted, but that's okay. So this is where we have kind of kept track of our own participation in the project. And you see that we've participated in 2013, 14, and then 16, 17, and 18. In 2015, I think that was the year we, for whatever reason, were not accepted into the program. You know, there's Google is sponsors like maybe a couple hundred projects, and for whatever reason that year we weren't selected as one of them. So this goes back. 2015 happens to be the year when MuseScore 2 was actually released. So these first couple of years that we participated was during the time between MuseScore 1 and MuseScore 2. And a number of projects were selected, including this one here that made it into MuseScore 2, MIDI import improvements. So there was a number of really significant improvements made to how MuseScore handles the import of MIDI files. And as an example of that, if I try to open a file here, I'm just going to open some random MIDI file. When I open I don't know what most of these are. These are files that I've downloaded for bug fix purposes or whatever else. One of the things that you get now is this MIDI import panel, and this has been the case, you know, ever since whenever that was, 2013, that lets you select a lot of details about what instrument was used, what kind of quantization. In other words, do we round the rhythms off to the nearest 8th note or the nearest 16th note? How many voices do we try to use? And then if you don't like the results that you see, you can just change the parameters here. Like, it looks like there's a piano staff that was recognized, and it's splitting that staff here, and maybe we didn't want that, or maybe we wanted a treble clef on both staves. So you can, actually, I don't know that there was a clef change in the middle of the staff. I think that's actually what that's about, is clef changes in the middle of the staff. Anyhow, there's various different options that exist here where you can kind of control how the MIDI file is interpreted on input, and a lot of things that that happen on MIDI input were greatly improved by this. So anyhow, that's a little bit about that project that made it into MuseScore 2. Then if we look on to 2014, there was quite a few projects here. One of them had to do with accessibility, making sure that if I have a screen reader installed, which I actually do have my screen reader installed. This might be fun. NVDA. This happens to be one of my pet projects. So
score note C5 half voice 1 measure 15 beat 3 staff 2.
There you go. So MuseScore read
16th.
aloud. Excuse me.
Close. And MuseScore 3. Victoria ovas omnes key transitus per IMT window.
So you have to realize.
Score note C5 half voice 1 measure 15 beat 3 staff 2.
Right. I think it will stop now because I'm not touching the keyboard. You have to realize, if you are a blind user of a computer, you can't see anything on the screen. You also can't really use the mouse because that depends on being able to see the mouse pointer. So you totally rely on the keyboard to interact with the program, and you rely on what's called a screen reader to read information back to you about the score. And so that's what you just heard there, was the screen reader. One called NVDA, there's a handful of them out there, reading back information about my score. And so that if I was a blind user, I can press
score note D5 half voice 1 measure 16 beat 1 staff 2 accidental sharp.
So there's an issue right now with the QT libraries we use where you have to actually touch the mouse before the screen reader will read. This worked really well in MuseScore 2, but we're using a different version of the QT or Qt libraries now, and they have an issue with some things that they've already fixed that issue, but we're not using the version of the library yet that contains that fix. So anyhow, that reading allows you to navigate through your scores, hear what's happening, because it will read to you all this information about the notes there, so that you're actually able to interact with MuseScore without having to see the screen. And that allows blind musicians to basically browse existing scores or even edit them. There's some things that we don't do yet, like the palettes.
Arpeggios and glissandos.
The palettes aren't accessible. Let me turn off the screen reader now, because it's, I think...
Google Hangouts. Telegram desk.
Yeah,
Safe,
which one of these?
Safely remove. NVD, exit.
All right, let me get rid of
Exit
that guy.
NVD, okay.
So anyhow, that was a big project, and then we had another
window. Score note D5 half voice 1 measure. Run
Didn't I shut that off?
Run and option. Okay.
All right.
Okay. MuseScore 3. Notification.
Sorry about that.
NVD.
Yeah, I will just say.
Tool. Install pending. Exit.
I did say exit. What would I like to do?
Okay.
Exit.
Okay.
There we go. All right. So the support for the screen reader and the support for a lot of these keyboard commands is relatively new as part of the projects that were added through Google Summer of Code. Another one that was added through Summer of Code is this selection facility, which basically has a number of aspects to it, but the main one is this window right here, the selection filter, that allows you to say, when you're selecting something in a score, to maybe exclude certain things. So like if I want to select from here to here, but I don't want the dynamics included in the selection, I can exclude them. So that was another project that was part of the Summer of Code that was merged in before MuseScore 2. Just to kind of continue, there's also import of guitar profiles. So that was something that we didn't really do well before, but now we really do a very good job of importing guitar profiles. Also Jack, which is a system for allowing MuseScore to communicate with digital audio workstations. And swing playback. So we have a fairly sophisticated swing playback facility right now, meaning I can enter some eighth notes, and then have it play back, but then I can add swing text, and now when it plays back, and then I can also edit the properties here and change some of the swing settings, what the actual ratio will be. I can switch between swing and straight in the same score. This was also done as part of the Google Summer of Code. So, and that was also done for MuseScore 2. So MuseScore 2 got to have a number of features added as a result of the Google Summer of Code. MuseScore 3 got still more. So one of them was some improvements to the playback and the synthesizer. Another was the real-time MIDI note entry. And I don't have a MIDI keyboard connected to be able to demonstrate this, but I can sort of demonstrate it using the on-screen keyboard, which actually happens to work. If I switch to the real-time let me think. If I switch to the real time, I don't have the keyboards set up that I would really need to do this. But if I hold, let me go to the manual mode. If I hold a note down, do I need to start the metronome? Okay, so it's been a while since I've used this feature, but it does actually work with the on-screen keyboard. If I hold down a keyboard, it will start ticking. Maybe I do need the automatic version. There you go. So I was able to enter a note by just holding the key down for that number of ticks. And then I can move on to the next note. And as soon as I enter as soon as I finish the measure, it corrects the rhythmic spelling of that measure. So, and that works with a MIDI keyboard, and it either can work in this sort of manual mode where you sort of do it one note at a time, or you can tap on the foot pedal to indicate the beat. And there's also an automatic one, a mode where it works with a metronome, but you need to set up the command to start the metronome. Anyhow, that was a big feature because really people like to do real-time input, and it's limited. It doesn't just let you just play anything you want and it notates it magically, but it does allow you to enter rhythms in real time, which is quite nice. There were a couple other projects that were implemented and merged. The annotations feature ended up not being, there was going to be a feature to add certain types of text, certain types of lines to the score, but it didn't end up quite making it. There was another tool that allows for a score like to combine flute parts, 2 flute parts on one staff of your score, and then extract it to separate parts. And that feature is present in MuseScore 3. There's some issues with it that really are going to require some work before it's really usable, but the feature is there. And then just, I think in 2017, there was some more intermediate state, there we go. There was some more work done on accessibility. There was also the timeline feature. So the timeline feature is here, view timeline. And that is this window here. Let me close the piano window now. And this shows an overview of your score that shows where there's time signature changes, where there's key changes, and where each instrument is actually playing and where it's not. So you get kind of an overview of your score to help with navigation. So anyhow, these are all features. There's a startup wizard now that asks you some questions and is able to determine things about your keyboard layout, and so that you have shortcuts that make sense for your particular keyboard. And then so that was 2017, and finally 2018, and there was another project involving a crash reporter that ended up not being merged. For 2018, this was just last year, and again, we don't have the correct updated thing here, but I can tell you what some of those projects were. In 2018, can I tell you what some of those projects were in 2018? I should be able to, right? Because I actually mentored the tours, and I did a whole presentation on this a few months ago, also at the end of 2018 when things were happening. But there's the startup tours, right? If you the first time you start up MuseScore, you get to see some sort of online help that appears when you start doing things that tells you, oh, here's how to do this thing that we think you're trying to do. And this got some nice positive feedback in the sort of famous review of MuseScore's user interface that someone posted to YouTube recently. He was impressed with the tours feature. He had some suggestions for improvement, but he liked the fact that it was there. So anyhow, those are some of the projects. There was another project involving a score comparison tool that I've demonstrated before, and just as a quick example of this, and I think this will be the last one that I do try to show here, I'm going to browse for a new score because I want to show you a thing that I actually use. So I have my online course that teaches people to use MuseScore, and in this course, I have a sample score that I use and tell people here, I want you to do your own version of this score. So once I loaded that score, it loads it into 2 sides of the window. I now also need to load a different version of the score into here. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to load a different version of this score. This is one that someone named Grant produced. So now I have in one window, I can have my version, the master version. In the other window, I have Grant's version. I hit the compare button, and let me close the timeline. and it gives me a list of all the changes. So it tells me that there were some changes here involving markup, which I don't really care about. This is maybe he had a different template happening as far as the his style settings and so forth. That could be because we were using different versions of MuseScore, different page margins. I don't care about any of that. What I do care about is that apparently there's a difference in accidental here. Like I can see in measure 4, it tells me that there was an inserted accidental, and sure enough, he's got an accidental inserted here. My master version does not. So that's showing me that difference between his version of the score and my version of the score. So I can use this to kind of grade people's work and get a quick sense of if they are entering this score into MuseScore and I want to compare it against my version, how good a job they did. So as an instructor, I use this feature, but you can also use it just to track changes to your own work. So those are some of the things that have been done in the Google Summer of Code. And I take the time to show you all those things for a number of reasons. One, if as a user of MuseScore, to make sure that you really understand what relevance any of this has to your life. I mean, this is really a wonderful thing that has produced some great features that we, some of us use every day. And if you are a potential developer thinking, or a student possibly wanting to get involved, I hope this gives you some idea of the breadth and the scope of the kinds of things that have made successful projects before. Each one of these was something, the score comparison tool did not exist before. Now it exists, and it's a much bigger deal than it looks like, because in order to make that score comparison work, there were fundamental changes to the file format that needed to happen, so that kind of irrelevant changes, like each measure is numbered. Well, right now, if I insert a measure here, that's going to throw off the measure numbering of every measure after that. Those would have showed up as differences before, because, oh, this measure number is different, this measure number is different, this measure number is different, and you'd have every single measure showing as different just because you inserted one measure. So Dimitri, the student who implemented this, had to kind of redesign the file format so that things like that didn't throw off the comparison. And it was actually a fairly major undertaking that made the file format a lot cleaner. So there's sometimes some under the hood changes that go along with these things that are more significant than what you're actually seeing. So these are the kinds of things that have made successful projects in the past. Now, again, I want to emphasize that this is a live chat thing here, and I see there's a few people watching live. If you've got questions or comments, by all means, feel free to say so. Chime in, questions, comments. What I want to do is probably steer a little bit more towards talking about, well, how does the program actually work? What's actually going to happen? Well, what happens is, over the next week, we get these proposals submitted, and we then get to those of us on the team who are the potential mentors look at these proposals, and we select the ones that we think are the most likely to be successful. And so here's my advice to any of you who are considering proposing. There's a lot about this process that's sort of intended to be sort of confidential, and so I'm not exactly sure how much of the process that I can really share, but I'll share what I think makes sense. In a typical year, we might get, say, 30-something proposals, but many of these proposals are from people who we don't even know who they are. They never participated in the chat. So we have the chat here on Telegram, and I suppose I should make sure, I don't know how to get, somewhere there must be a way for me to get the URL here, right? There is a URL for this Telegram chat. Anyhow, if you go to MuseScoreorg, contribute development, you should find the link. So maybe that's what I will do. So I'll go to MuseScoreorg, contribute development. So if you haven't participated in the chat on Telegram, we probably don't know who you are. Or if you haven't submitted any bug fixes yet. And this link here, so let me put this link into the chat here. that's that. And then the chat specifically is, it looks like, I suppose that's probably in the developer's handbook here then. So in the developer's handbook is more information, I guess. Developer group chat, that sounds good. All right, there looks like the link. And here's the chat. All right, so these in the chat here is where the developers discuss aspects relating to development. If you are working on a bug fix or so forth and you have questions, here's a place you can ask. If you're trying to get feedback about developing the ideas for your proposal, you can ask questions there. We'll get, you know, other developers can give you comments. Well, I think probably it's better off to do it this way, or I think you should get feedback from users by going to the forum or whatnot. So an important part of the process of being a successful applicant, I would say, is being involved. So being involved on this chat here, being involved by actually posting to the forums to get feedback on your idea, being involved by actually submitting bug fixes. So that's like one of the most important things also, is we need to know that you're capable of accomplishing what's in your proposal. And the best way we know that is we want you to get involved here. So if you come here to the developer's handbook, you'll see how to go about doing things. There's a specific list of issues that we've identified as being easy. Now, at this point, you can see the ones in green. These already have, someone has already submitted a fix for. They're not actually merged yet, meaning they're not included in MuseScore yet, but they've already been taken, basically. But there's some other ones here. This one someone today I just saw is working on, but they haven't submitted anything yet. Here's another one that I think is pretty easy. In fact, I know it's very easy. And there's a number of issues here that are easy. And I would start with the recent ones here. This one in particular, maybe a couple of these. Actually, that one's probably not as easy as someone thinks it is. But we want you actually submitting a bug fix, actually going through the process here. So we want you to learn how to compile MuseScore, make sure you compile it, and then make sure that you've actually gone through and done a test and done a bug fix. So that was in the developer's handbook. We also want you to pay attention to this Git workflow page. This explains the process of actually submitting your bug fix. So this has a lot of details that are very useful. So let me put that into the chat. And the actual developer's handbook too, I think, was worth it. So this process of how to, make sure that you know how to compile MuseScore, that you've learned enough about the code to be able to fix a bug, you've learned enough about the process to be able to actually submit your bug fix. I would say, without going out on too much of a limb, that if you haven't gone through that process, your proposal is not likely to be accepted, because we have no way of knowing if you have any chance of accomplishing that. So that, we might get 30 proposals, but maybe half of them are from people who we just haven't interacted with, and maybe a couple of them look promising enough that we consider them, even though we haven't interacted with these people and that we don't know what they're capable of. Maybe a couple of them make the short list of ones that we at least consider into like a second round of consideration. But boy, don't make things hard on yourself. Do what it takes to build MuseScore. Do what it takes to find a bug to fix and fix the bug. Interact with us on the chat. Do the things that help yourself really be taken seriously as an applicant. That's just my advice to you as someone who's mentored for several of these projects and has been part of the process of selecting the applicants. So anyhow, that's some of my advice on the Summer of Code. Once we get past the selecting of the applicants, well, there's this whole complicated process where Google tells us, I think we tell Google how many slots we want, like a minimum number that we would really be happy with and the maximum we could handle. And then we also tell Google which projects we think we might want to include, and then they tell us how many projects we actually have, and then we finalize which ones are actually the selected ones, and we cross-check it against the other, or Google cross-checks for us against other projects, because you're allowed to submit projects to multiple organizations. So if if you're interested in working on MuseScore, but you're also interested in working on LibreOffice, maybe you can submit a proposal to both, but you're only going to get accepted by one. So even if both MuseScore and LibreOffice or whoever else accepts your proposal, Google is going to basically contact both organizations and say, hey, look, you both selected this person, who wants them, and then we decide amongst ourselves which actually gets chosen. So do make sure that you really are available to work full-time, meaning like 30 to 40 hours, I think is how Google defines it. If you are not available to work full-time for essentially the entire period, the entire period, meaning once coding starts, if I go back to where that timeline was, there's this community bonding period, which is just after the students have been selected, but before you're officially starting coding. This is just you're doing more bug fixes, you're doing whatever else, and by all means you can start coding. We kind of expect that there will be some coding, but there's no requirements of submitting things on a regular basis during this period. Once you start working on your projects, you have a weekly blog that you keep up to date, and we track your progress, and we expect there to look like a full week's worth of progress every week. And if it's looking like you're not working on it full time, that's a red flag. And there is a whole procedure of an evaluation period in which we are constantly evaluating your work. And during these evaluations, if you really haven't been keeping on the schedule that your proposal suggested that you were supposed to keep to and that we agreed on, then you can be failed at the evaluation point, and Google strongly encourages us to fail students, not to just pass them if they're not really working full-time and producing results. So we have had to fail a couple of students who just weren't able to put the full time that the project requires, and so their progress wasn't what full-time work would imply, or what their own proposal suggested their progress would be. So there's this evaluation period, there's more coding, there's another evaluation period, more coding, and then final evaluations. During that period, you're expected to be developing the code for your proposal, doing whatever testing is necessary, doing these weekly blogs. The weekly blogs are really important. It's how everyone keeps track of you, but it's also expected that you're constantly participating in the chat, and we like to keep all the communication in the public chat, not private email with your mentor. I mean, yeah, there's going to be some of that happens, but we like to keep as much of the communication public as possible. And then at the end of that period, assuming that everything goes well and you pass your evaluation, then eventually Google comes through and you get probably a certificate. I haven't seen what that might look like, but you also get whatever stipend that was agreed upon for your participation in this. So that is how the process works. I don't know, again, how many slots we're going to get this year, but just guessing, based on previous years, you saw it was usually like 3 or 4. That's reasonable to guess we might get 3 or 4 again. And so there'll be 3 or 4 mentors who are then, each project will have a mentor. Sometimes it can be multiple mentors for a project. And you'll kind of work with your mentor, and that's more or less how the program works. So I hope that was informative, maybe a little inspiring to see the actual results of people's previous work that has been merged into MuseScore. Those of you who are interested in participating in Summer of Code, I will assume that like some of you are already here on the chat and have been participating, and if you've got questions, you can obviously ask here on the developers chat. You don't need to be using this video chat here, but again, if there are any questions I can answer right now, I'm happy to do that. Let me just say a couple other words about what's coming up. We are currently working on the MuseScore 3.1 release. There may or may not be another 3.0. Like right now we're at 3.0.5. Maybe there'll be a 3.0.6. Maybe there won't. I don't know. But the next sort of bigger release after that will be 3.1, which is going to have a number of important bug fixes and little, feature changes. But the main thing that we're really excited about is single note dynamics, because that's something that people have been wanting a long time. The ability to have a whole note actually crescendo or decrescendo over the course of that one note. So that's the big new feature coming. And the code for it was implemented already a few weeks ago. Well, it was implemented quite a while ago over the course of a long time, but was merged into the code base a few weeks ago. But the sound font needed to be updated to take advantage of that. And I'm looking here on the chat, and just this morning, it was announced. Am I looking in the right place? Well, it was announced just this morning, actually, that there we go. The sound font is updated, and here's a link to the sound font here. So that feels like that was an important step in the release of MuseScore 3.1. So MuseScore 3.1, I mean, we don't have an official date on it, but it's starting to look much closer. Like, okay, we're getting to be quite close to being ready to release that. But then, I assume there will continue to be, as there, we released 3.0 in December, and then every few weeks after that, we've had a, 3.0.1, 3.02, 3.03, 3.04, 3.05. There'll probably be a 3.11, 3.12, 3.13. So whatever work is done for the Summer of Code, I'm trying to bring it back to the point here. Whatever work is done for the Google Summer of Code will most likely make it into. It won't make it in 3.1 because that's going to happen long before the end of the summer, I would hope. But it might be in 3.1.3 or one release there, or maybe there's a 3.2. I mean, it depends on how big the project is, whether what the scope of it is. But I think compared to in the past when we've really gone like a year between releases, I mean, from 1.1 to 1.2 and then 1.3 and then 2.0 and then 2.1. 2.2. These were like a year from release to release, and now we're talking about essentially monthly releases. So the code that gets written for Summer of Code has a pretty good chance of being merged relatively quickly, not necessarily waiting around a year or two, has sometimes been the case in the past. So that's what I came prepared to talk about. And again, if there's questions, feel free to hit me up before I sign off, or just come to the developers chat and feel free to continue the conversation there. Again, I do these chats every week, just talking about whatever other topic. So this week I talked about Summer of Code. Last week I talked about, what did I talk about last week? I don't even remember what I talked about last week. But sometimes I talk about how to use some feature in MuseScore, how to accomplish some goal. Sometimes I talk more about the music creation process, how to actually go about writing music or arranging music and so forth. I'm kind of feeling like that's where I might be back to next week, is something having to do with the music creation process. But I don't know, we'll see. And as always, I'm also open to people's ideas about what they'd like to see me talk about. So that said, I think I will get back to what I am doing today, which has to do with things like updating my course from MuseScore 3 and maybe developing some new courses to teach about music creation. So that's kind of my agenda. So I will sign off and hope to see you all next week. Have a good day.